During this podcast, you may have to raise the volume on your computer or your iPod because my daughter's sleeping and I don't want to wake her up. I want to take you on a tour of the Layers palette in Illustrator, and it's actually quite a bit deeper than it might appear on the surface. There are a lot of functions in here, a lot of hidden functions too. So you can see that I have a poster here that's done by Illustrator. You can actually find this in the Adobe Illustrator folder in Applications. There are multiple layers on here, so the work is really well organized on the layers, and each layer is named so I can tell what artwork is where. As you can see on the left, all the layers are visible, all the eyeballs are showing, so I can choose to click on various eyeballs and turn off the visibility of those layers. If I want to turn them back on, I can simply drag up or down the visibility indicators and they'll all turn on or off. I can also option click and see every other layer turns on and off. So that's quite convenient. The next row over is the lock. It toggles locking on and off. So the same thing, I can drag up and down and turn on the locks for whatever layers I want. I can also option click and turn on or off the other layers locking toggle. So this is quite convenient. It's pretty quick. If you want to work on one layer and lock all the others, you just option click on that one layer and everything else is locked, and that means that I cannot select it on the page. As I said, every layer is locked here. If I want to go and select artwork on one layer, all I need to do is click to the right of the circle and it selects the artwork on that layer. Isn't that nice? I told you there was a lot of hidden stuff in this palette. So I can go ahead and click at various places and it's selecting the artwork on that layer. Speaking of this indicator here, I can actually grab this and drag it to another layer and it's going to drag the artwork to that layer. I'm going to go ahead and undo that because I don't want to mess up this illustration. I can drag that dot again, but if I hold option, it's actually going to copy the content to that layer. So now that content that I just dragged, I option dragged it, so it's actually on two layers. So I'm going to undo that too to step back a little bit. At the bottom of the palette, you have a control for clipping masks, which I'm actually going to deal with in a separate podcast. You have an indicator to create a new sublayer. So there we go. We created a sublayer to the snake layer. I'm going to undo that. We have a control to create new layer. So if I simply click on that, it creates a layer above the one we're on. If I Apple click, it creates a layer on top of everything. I'm going to go back to the middle here. If I option and Apple click, it brings up a new the layer options dialog and gives me the opportunity to name it and then set the various options for that layer. So you can see we can set it as a template, we can lock it so that it doesn't move, we can hide the content on it, we can suppress printing if we want so that the content shows on the page but it doesn't come out when we print. We can turn off preview mode, which makes it's the same thing as typing Apple Y on the keyboard. It shows it to us in outlines, and we can also dim placed images on the layer. So those are all the various options there. We can also change the color for the layer. So I got that by clicking either Apple option or simply option on the keyboard and you get the dialog. If you hold Apple option, it creates the layer in question underneath, which is really nice. And finally, we have the trash can on the right, which does what you'd think it would do. You can delete layers by simply clicking on it. It asks you for confirmation and you can say yes or no. In this case, I'll say no. In the flyout menu, there are a ton of different options. So again, you can go new layer, new sublayer, you can duplicate or delete. You can also duplicate layers by simply by dragging them and then holding option, and the plus symbol shows up indicating that you're going to copy the whole layer. So that actually duplicated everything on that layer. In the flyout menu, you can get the options for that layer in question. So that's we saw this before. You can also get here by double clicking on the layer and this options dialog comes up. Back to the flyout menu. Again, clipping masks I'm going to deal with in a separate podcast. Locate layer means that if I select something in the canvas, I can go in and say locate layer, and it shows me the layer. That was locate layer. We have flatten artwork, which will do what it says it does. There we go. It's all down to one layer, which I wouldn't suggest since the artwork was so well organized. We can collect a new layer, which if we select more than one layer by holding the Apple key and clicking on multiple layers, we can go to collect a new layer, and it created a layer and put them all as sub layers inside that one. So that's quite convenient also. So it collects them all together and puts them inside of one layer. Flatten artwork, collecting. I'm going to skip these for now because they're a little bit more involved, but it basically releases sub-layers as layers. It breaks up all the sub-layers. Template we've seen. All these options we've seen. These deal with the same as the eyeball and the lock. Paste remembers layers I have as a separate podcast, so you can go and see that. And then finally there's the palette options for the layers palette. So here we have show layers only, and we'll turn that off to show sub-layers. We'll use a large row size, and we'll show layer thumbnails just to make a change here. So I'll say OK, and look at this. We have our layers palette, and we can collapse all the layers. We have icons, and we have sub-layers now that indicate each item on the layer. Okay, so that's a quick tour of the layers palette in Illustrator. I'd urge you to explore it. There's a lot more there than appears on the surface, and it can really help you keep your work organized in Illustrator.